FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
You know, why is it that everyone is now talking about the middle class and those struggling to make it? Why is it that it's become transcendent? Yesterday in the Republican debate, I think it was said 4 times, someone mentioned the middle class. And it's because if there is a defining element of what it means to be American, it's the notion that there's a ladder, that if you work hard, that if you play by the rules, you can ascend that ladder. It's this notion of American opportunity. When the gap grows so far between those at the top and everyone else, we lose this very American sense of that aspiration that keeps us moving forward. And that's the reason why there is this level of anxiety today. You know, I look at this issue through the lens of my experience. I went to public schools my whole life. My mother was a union teacher. My dad was a lawyer that literally hung a shingle outside our house on 6th Street. You know, we didn't sit around at the Weiner table like we were at the Kennedy compound saying you're going to be an ambassador, you're going to be the CEO of something, you're going to be a senator. But there was this sense that, you know, that if you had the 3 elements that New York City brought that made us the capital of the working class, the notion that our schools were never sensational, they were never these, you know, these ivy-lined buildings of spectacular educational achievement, but they were good, solid institutions. If you had the ability to find a home that you can afford to live in and the ability to find a job that can give you that economic ability to hand off to your children a slightly better life than the one you found, then that the middle class dream as it was, even the ebb and flows of politics, even the ebb and flows of the economy, even the great external threats of world wars and the like, that fundamental strain continued to be there. For the first time, we in New York City, and this is true in my colleagues' cities, I imagine as well, we're starting to see the middle class and those who are struggling to make it to the middle class wondering because none of those 3 elements are as secure or at least as available as they once were. The public school system is not what it was. It's not nearly as bad as people characterize, and I think that there's now, we on the Democratic side have started to join our Republican friends in beating down the school system. It's not as bad as it used to be, but I can tell you this, that people like my mother, who was in the school system for 32 years, we all know that women of that age, when they were getting into the job market, they didn't have 50 or 60 different opportunities. So we captured this universe of brilliant women that went into teaching. My mother was a master's in finance. She was an extraordinary asset. If she was going into if she was born 50 or so years or 30 or 40 years later, it would be an entirely different story about the job opportunities. Well, those teachers are leaving, and not only are we not doing anything to capture them and to make sure we keep them as long as possible and let them mentor the more junior teachers who now have an average time in the schools here in New York City of less than 3 years, we're doing everything possible to drive them out because they're pricey. They're expensive teachers. They're teachers that have maxed out on their pensions. We have now reached the place that in this borough of Manhattan, this glorious city, the average apartment is $1.3 million. That's the average apartment. When people talk about this idea of having congestion pricing to come into the city, there's already a price to come into the city, and it's average $1.3 million. And when you have a job market that is far different than it was a generation ago, that we really have a much more narrow cast creation of jobs that are happening, we rely more and more on the great entrepreneurial spirit of the small business person in all 5 boroughs, you realize that it is an entirely different environment. And I think that we have to, as mayors, as members of Congress, as governors, we have to address those 3 fundamental building blocks that make the middle class understand that it's the middle class. And let me just conclude. I know I've taken some time. You know, Mr. Kuttner said in his introduction, he made a remark about how what you have to be in the middle class. When you take a look at how people define themselves, you ask them their income, you ask them what they do for a living, and then you ask them to kind of characterize themselves. People making as little as $20 or $22 or $23,000 a year see themselves as being the middle class because it plays to our whole sense of what we are as a country. It is an honorable thing to be in the middle class, and people want to be there, and I think we in government have to do a better job of giving them the opportunity to get there.